Hi guys, welcome to another episode of the Clubhouse. Today we're talking to F1 Williams development driver Jamie Chadwick. She's been doing awesome work during this lockdown as well, raising valuable funds for a charity that's very close to her heart. And she's on the line now. Now, Jamie, I sound like a bit of a broken record at the moment talking about it, but how are you finding life in lockdown at the moment? Are you back at your family home and able to chill out a bit?
No, well, I'm sort of doing okay. I'm getting there. I think the first few weeks I didn't find too bad. Now I'm a few weeks into it. I definitely feel like I'm itching to get back to normality more than ever. But yeah, I mean, I'm still in London, so I'm on my own in a flat. But actually, it's not been too bad in that sense because I've been able to sort of just focus on my training, get my head down, and hopefully, when we do come out of this, we'll be in a better position.
Yeah, and I'd imagine as a racing driver as well, it's pretty, one of the hardest sports to be able to adapt to being at home, training from home. Nothing really replaces being out on the track, but you haven't exactly been binge watching Netflix. You recently cycled 100 miles, raising almost, I think, £8,000 for a charity that's very close to your heart.
Yeah, I mean, I have been binge watching Netflix, don't worry about that. But, yeah, I've been trying to just do as much as I can. I think I keep saying it's a bit weird situation for us as racing drivers or just sports people in general because we're so used to traveling and always being on the go to suddenly have all this time at home is actually quite weird. But from my side, it's been quite nice because I've been able to sort of just get my teeth into my training, have a bit of structure in that sense. And I think because as a driver, my whole sort of way of life is focused around a goal. So you work hard towards that goal, you achieve the goal, you sort of relish the success, and then you go again. And not being able to have that because we've not got any racing has been a bit difficult. So I've kind of replaced that by setting myself some mad challenges like the 100-mile bike ride and a couple of others to try and get the same feeling back.
And you completed that challenge in a ridiculously quick time as well. Has cycling always been something you've done alongside your racing?
Yeah, it's a bit of a cliche one, I think. I think a lot of racing drivers seem to cycle. I don't know why or what the comparison is. It must be something to do with the speed and at least there's two of the four wheels. So yeah, I've kind of got into it a little bit over the last year, but it's definitely been fast tracked over this lockdown period. And yeah, I was very lucky when I did do the 100 miles. I got a few people to get involved on Zwift, which made it a lot easier, helped the time pass, and yeah, just managed to crack on and get it done, fortunately.
Now, your racing career started in karting, which seems to be the natural starting point for most, well, future stars of motor racing. What really prompted that start in your racing career? Was it a sort of your family that pushed you into it, or was it something that always spiked your interest?
Neither really, to be honest. I think, yeah, my family aren't from a motor racing background at all, so it really came out of nowhere, but more from my older brother. He was the one that I think went to some friend's go-karting party or something like that, and he got the bug, maybe did a year or two of go-karting before it took me the opportunity to see if I could have a go and see if I could beat him, and it was for me. And yeah, one of those sports, I think, the first time I drove the kart, I remember, and that kind of instant feeling that I got from everything. And it wasn't just the speed, it wasn't just, the feeling of driving the car, it was the whole atmosphere of being at a racetrack for the first time. Yeah, drew me to it. And I guess from there onwards, that was it.
And why do you think you maybe sided with the sort of individual sport a little bit more? I mean, I know motor racing is about being part of the team as well, but generally when you're out on the track, it is you on your own at that point. What do you think kind of spurred you into that sport as opposed to maybe a team sport, football, for example, or basketball, netball, something along those lines?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because actually before racing, I did always do team sports. So it's something I've actually never really thought too much about. But it's the answer I think a lot of drivers would say. It really still is a team sport. And I think it's nice because obviously the drivers does seem to get the plaudits and they're the sort of forefront of the team. But whenever I've been racing, I've always felt part of a big team, part of a big community. And that's one of the things I instantly loved about it. Firstly, I think I was about 12 years old in a kart team with my brother, a bunch of older guys that were like my big brothers and mechanics. And my mechanic at that time was the guy that ran the team's granddad. So he was about 70. So I had this sort of whole range of people around me, and I just absolutely loved that.
And were you quickly beating those guys that were older than you? Was it fairly apparent earlier on that, you know, this was for you and this was your career?
Yeah, I think what I quite liked, I think when I was younger, I was always naturally quite sporty. I always loved playing sport, and didn't matter what sport it was, I would always do whatever was available to me. But the one thing I'm probably guilty of is I don't like doing stuff that I'm not good at. So if I don't pick it up quite quickly, then it probably gets parked quite quickly as well. So motorsport was one of these sports where I picked it up really quickly, and because I was quite willing to learn, I was so fascinated by it all. I think my learning phases were quite big, so I made massive steps and I improved so quickly. That's what really drew me to it, and I think that feeling and that motivation of being able to make those steps is what, yeah, excited me so much about it all.
And you'd won the Ginetta Junior Cup, the championship, and then the British GT4 title as well, all before you'd even passed your driving test. Was there a point during winning those trophies that you felt as though, you know, Formula One was going to be the ultimate goal for you?
I mean, I think looking back, when asked about it, I probably always said it was, but I don't think I ever really believed it. I
Right.
think the main thing with motorsport is it's such a, you know, crazy world. There's such a big step between, you know, where I was back then as a go-karter and Formula One. I think I can imagine I always said I want to be an F1, but I never probably believed it. And for me, when I started, it was very much a hobby. It definitely wasn't something I thought was ever going to be a career. Slowly, as I went up the ranks and I got to maybe winning the British GT Championship, I started to believe it could be a career, but by no means did I think F1 was a potential goal. And yeah, I would say only, and being completely honest, when I signed with Williams last year, it was probably the first time I thought genuinely this could be something that I could achieve and what I want to achieve as well.
And then we'll get onto the Williams deal shortly. But the more I read about your career in motor racing, there's always a common theme where it's Jamie Chadwick, the first female driver to win the British GT title, or the only female entrant into a particular event. Is that something that you are proud of and you feel as though you're paving the way for future female stars, or is it also something that really frustrates you?
It's a good way of putting it. I think there's definitely both sides of it. From my side, I think it's a nice added bonus, but I first and foremost want to win a championship, and I would never go into the British GT Championship thinking, oh, I could become the first female to do this. I always think I just want to win that championship, and it's a little bit cliche, but that's kind of the way I see it. And it's a nice added bonus, definitely, but at the same time, it doesn't really make a difference to anything in my career. And hopefully, you know, by me being the first, there are going to be many more girls that come through and take any of those records away from me, and yeah, come through and pave the way as well.
And are you finding when you turn up to races now and you see the crowds that there is that stronger, female audience and young potential future female racing drivers that are coming up to you and wanting to talk to you about your career so far?
Yeah, for sure. It's been quite cool in that sense, because I think I've never really been that in the spotlight, I would say. But with W Series last year, that's the first time I think the exposure became a bit greater to, younger female audience. And that was really exciting to see, particularly at races like Brands Hatch at the end of the year, where there's a big crowd, but predominantly, or a good amount of that crowd was there for W Series, and a good amount of that crowd were young female drivers, which is really, really cool and inspiring to see. I always say I do this for myself. I don't do this for anyone else. I'm not trying to, create a whole new generation. But when you do see that, it is really, really cool to see.
Now, I have to mention this. I didn't actually know this about you, but in 2016, you obviously competed in the British GT with Great British Bake Off's Paul Hollywood as your teammate. I didn't realise this at all. What was it like having him alongside you? Was he ultra competitive?
He was, yeah. God, that feels like a long time ago now. But yeah, that was so my second year. In 2015, we won the championship. And in 2016, I was doing my A-levels. So I didn't really have the option to do a full program of racing. Paul really wanted to do some racing, but his commitments with Bake Off meant he couldn't do half the year. So we agreed to do the second half of the season in British GT, and that really was throwing us both into the deep end, going in just for the second half. Paul having not done much racing before, but yeah, he did an amazing job actually. He really took to it. I think the main thing with motorsport is just the ability to learn, and he had that ability to learn, and yeah, it was really fun to work with him. I do miss those days, but yeah, hopefully he will continue his racing career and can do a bit more.
And beyond this, you made your switch to single seaters into F3, where you continually break records. And we've had the inaugural W Series that you mentioned a few moments ago. Ultimately, you want to be racing with male drivers, female and male drivers in the same races. But like you've mentioned, the W Series provides a really nice gateway for those female drivers to potentially move on then to F2 and F1.
Yeah, exactly that. I think that's what W Series is there for. It's a platform, it's a springboard effectively for us female drivers to get bigger and greater opportunities. And yeah, I would say I'm firsthand in a good example of someone that's happened to. And I think that's not obviously the ultimate goal is to be in F1. I still know there's a lot more in between W Series and F1 for me to achieve. But I think what it's done for me, even just last year, has been incredible. And obviously with super license points coming into play for this year as well in the 2 F1 races or support races of the F1 calendar, I think it really is starting to become a great series for, you know, all female drivers to get that platform.
And I don't want to jump to a conclusion or be assumptive, but along the way in your racing career, have you kind of experienced that where people have maybe disregarded your talent purely based on the fact that you are a female driver? Have you had that kind of behavior towards you? I don't want to necessarily suggest that it has happened, but I can imagine there are people out there that maybe don't take you as seriously as the male drivers, and wrongly so.
I'm sure there is. I'm sure there's a lot maybe behind my back. I think to my face, I've generally received quite a lot of support, and probably an overwhelming, unnecessary amount sometimes. Sometimes I think, you know, the people in the sport or around the sport are so desperate to see a female succeed. You know, I still need to achieve a lot more before I can get to where I need to be. But yeah, I think from my side, I've only experienced quite positive support. I think, like you said, maybe behind my back, or like I said, maybe behind my back or elsewhere, I think people might just think, you know, I'm another token female driver. But that's where I think I've got to put the hard work in to make sure I can prove with the results that that's not the case. And yeah, I deserve to be there on merit.
And have there been any sort of nuggets or small pieces of advice that any particular, you know, Formula One drivers or big names in the industry have given you along the way that have really sort of stuck with you?
It's a good question. I've had a lot of advice along the way, and that's where I've been super, super lucky. I've had some exposure to some amazing people from early days in my career, and even now, the people I meet and the people I spend time with, I just get a huge amount of information from. And yeah, I think as of recent, I remember I was doing the Nürburgring 24-hour race with Alex Brundle, and Martin was doing some permit races himself. And to think of specific examples off my top of my head will be tough now, but he gave me a huge amount of advice, and he's someone that I think is got a huge amount of history in the sport, knows a huge amount, but is also very in touch with everything that's going on now. So yeah, I think I was in a bit of a difficult position deciding something with, I think it might have been to do with Williams, and he really did help me out there. So yeah, there's quite a few individuals, but Martin's one that I've always been able to get good advice from.
And speaking of Williams, which Martin Brundle has obviously helped you make that decision, you've been appointed, well, you were appointed a while back now, Williams F1 development driver. First of all, for people that may not necessarily know what that role means as part of an F1 team, what does that mean for you across the course of a season?
Yeah, so a lot of the role is predominantly factory-based. So I do a huge amount at the simulator, sadly not right now, but under normal circumstances, I keep getting the phone notifications, because on the F1 weekends when, you know, the 2 F1 drivers will be at the track doing practice sessions, I'll be on the simulator doing correlations. So a lot of that helps the team with the development of the car and fast tracking any potential setup changes or correlation to getting them in the best of shape as possible for the race ahead. But also it's for me to be able to develop and learn what it takes to be a Formula One driver, which there is a huge amount to know, there's a huge amount to learn, and to be able to get that experience under my belt at this stage, I think will prepare me the best way as possible to ultimately get in an F1 car at some stage.
And are you close to the guys that are actually on the grid? I mean, obviously George Russell's a fellow Brit. Do you get a chance to speak to them and sort of compare notes?
Yeah, I mean, I've known George for a number of years now. So George is someone I've always been able to get advice from. And I think the job he did last year was really impressive. I think I've always rated George, but to be in the team and actually see the way he works is, yeah, unbelievably impressive. So that's always been cool to see. But then on Nicholas's side as well, that's nice because he's come through the development program as of last year, a little bit like me. So I've seen sort of him make the transition from effectively where I am, although he was in a bit more of a reserve role, to actually making the step up to the full-time race seat. So that's cool to see. And again, I think it's a shame you can't see it yet because the season's not gone yet, but Nicholas is one of the nicest guys on the grid. So it'll be nice for that to come across this year too.
Yeah, because his name on the grid does come under a bit of a cloud, and unnecessarily so as well, because obviously there's an argument that, you know, a place on the F1 grid sometimes is helped along by, you know, financial backing, but he's an incredibly talented driver in his own right. And are you hopeful, you know, when we eventually do get up and running again, if it is behind closed doors, that Williams can make a real mark this year?
Yeah, I really hope so. I think it's now just going to be progression, making the best of a bad situation. You know, they've got no information from this year. They've had no races, just testing. So it's going to be super difficult when they get back going. But I think the teams worked so hard over the winter, really to turn things around from last year. So it'll be interesting to see how things do start for them when we finally do get back racing.
And speaking of your when you were first called up to Williams, was it Claire Williams that gave you that opportunity? Was it Claire that, you know, made the initial phone call? What happened in that moment?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. I've known Claire actually for a long time now. Not well, but I'd had a meeting with her years ago, and I was doing sports cars and GT racing at the time. And she said, if you ever do make the switch to single seaters, let's keep in touch. Obviously, time goes by and W Series came about. And just before the first W Series race, Claire and her husband, Mark, approached us. And Mark was looking to sort the driver academy out at Williams because didn't really have a big place before. And he really wanted to get something in place that, you know, could support us young drivers. So he and Claire came out to Hockenheim, the first W Series race, put a bit of pressure on. Fortunately, I won that race. Fortunately, I won that race and it went well. So after that, I was able to sign the contract, and then it all got announced on my 21st birthday. So yeah, it was a good few weeks all in all for me.
So it does sound, it's one hell of a way to spend your 21st birthday. But when you obviously came out to watch you, I mean, you mentioned nerves there. Do you get nervous when you jump in, you know, into the driver's seat? Is that something you've had to kind of learn to deal with over the years, or is it not really something that's bothered you as such?
No, definitely get nervous. I think, yeah, I mean, my approach has changed over the years. I definitely benefit, or I feel my best in the car when I'm quite relaxed and laid back. I don't like getting nervous. I don't like getting tense, but I think it's a natural part of it all. You know, it shows you care. It shows it means something to you. And definitely when you've got Claire Williams watching you from pole position at the first W Series race, it's nerve-wracking, but it's something I've learned to deal with. And yeah, I think over the course of last year, I definitely got better at controlling that.
And your partnership with Williams and with, you know, Nicholas and George, do you ever get a chance to kind of compare your times and your performances with those guys? Are you kind of up there on a level with, how does that work? Do you ever sort of think to yourself, I could quite easily be out there right now?
I do. I always say it because I do a lot on the simulator, and they do, well, obviously over the years, they've done a huge amount on the simulator, but sometimes they'll just drop in ahead of a race weekend for a day or so and leave. So quite often I might be quicker on the simulator because I've done a lot more running with a different setup or whatever. And I'm there like, right, can I do the next FP1 or But yeah, I mean, it's for me, it's just focusing on doing the job I can do, learning as much as possible, working with the engineers, and making sure if the opportunity does come around, you know, I'm as ready as possible.
And you mentioned the simulator there, and there's been the esports side of things, and the virtual Grand Prix that we've seen taking place during lockdown have proved very popular. Have you got involved quite heavily with that side of things, and is it something you enjoy?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I've always been interested in. It's not been the kind of thing that I've been able to do too much of. I feel like I'm still the kind of person I'd rather go outside and ride my bike. I mean, I'm fascinated by the big boom of esports. I've kind of anticipated it was going to happen before COVID-19, but I think it's just been fast tracked because of that. And from my side, I've got involved in a couple of events. I have really enjoyed it, and it's been fun to watch as well. I think I need to get a bit of a better setup before I get too involved with some of the big boys, but yeah, from my side, there's two sides of it. I think it's nice to be out competitive racing, doing something that keeps those competitive juices flowing. But at the same time, I miss the real thing. And yeah, I think nothing quite replaces that.
And speaking of the real thing, how long, well, obviously you don't know how long it'll be until we're all back watching sport again, but what are the goals for you for the remainder of this year, do you feel? Where do you think you can take your racing?
It's a good question. I think it's the uncertainty for everyone that's proven to be a bit difficult. Really not having a clue what, you know, might be left of this year is making it quite difficult to prepare. But I think I kind of see it as a little bit, you know, it's not going to be the perfect situation. So we need to make the best of whatever comes around this year, whether it's a few W Series races or it might just be some esports races, who knows? And then when we get back properly and focus on 2021, potentially, that's got to be when we hit it hard.
And as a racing driver, you've always got to be on your toes. You can never really predict what's coming too far down the line. We've already seen movement this season, and especially ahead of next year when a lot of contracts come to an end. I mean, Carlos Sainz has obviously already been announced to move to Ferrari. You've got to be constantly on your toes, wondering what the next move is. Where could you see yourself potentially in 2021? Would that be with Williams on the grid finally?
Oh, good question. Yeah, there's a lot of movement going around. I think it's exciting from a young driver's point of view. I think 2021 would be too soon to be pushing for that F1 seat, but I think if I can try and get onto the F1 package in some way, so hopefully Formula 3 with a good team, then that just takes me that step closer towards the ultimate goal, and then who knows where we can end up after that.
But it's nice as well. There's such an influx of British drivers as well. George Russell, obviously Lando Norris. I mean, Alex Albon's obviously got a sort of dual nationality. But it's brilliant that we've got that really strong British representation as well, alongside Lewis Hamilton, that's obviously dominated the F1 for a number of years now.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's so strong here in the UK. The racing growing up, you know, both Lando and George came through sort of British F3, F4, similar to what I did in British F3. So I think definitely the racing over here in the UK is very, very strong. It does make it, you know, a good opportunity for us Brits to be able to climb up the higher ranks. And yeah, it's really nice to see from a sporting perspective, because they're young guys, you know, being thrown into sort of a pretty tough environment, and they're coping with it really, really well. And I think that's been really cool to see last year.
Well, it's been a real pleasure talking to you, and we wish you all the best of luck for whatever remains of this season, and hopefully next year and years to come, we'll see you carving it up in Formula One as well. So thank you, Jamie.
No worries. Cheers. Thank you.
Thanks for watching, guys. Remember, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to click like and subscribe, and we'll see you for another episode very soon.